Ladies and gentlemen, if you'd like to take your seats at the back, we're just about to get started. A hugely warm welcome to the Centre for Social Justice event at the Conservative Party. We are really privileged this evening to have Jenni Russell from The Times interviewing Iain Duncan Smith. Pardon? These very rude comments coming from behind me. No heckling, Mr. Duncan Smith. So in terms of, I just wanted to say a brief word about the Centre for Social Justice. We were started in 2004 to put social justice at the heart of British politics. And everything we do is about reversing the 5 pathways to poverty: family breakdown, failed education, addiction, debt and welfare dependency. And it's our vision and objective to see that sort of transformation at a personal level, a community level and systemically at a national level. That is what we're all about. So do connect with us, ask us questions about our work. We would love to meet with you and partner with you with everything you're doing as well. So tonight though is about an interview with Iain. Iain is the chairman of the Centre for Social Justice. As I was putting his biography together, I thought he's the former leader of the Conservative Party. He's a former Secretary of State for Work and Pensions. And I thought you'd love this one, yeah. And by 2019, March the 31st, hopefully he'll be a former Brexiteer as well. But also, we're hugely... No. But we're privileged tonight to have Jenni Russell, as I said, columnist for The Times. She also writes for the Sunday Times and the Evening Standard. And if you read her biography, has been awarded with just about every literary award as well. So I'm not going to take up any more of your time because actually it's not me you want to hear from. It's Iain Duncan Smith and Jenni Russell. Yeah.
I hope that in the next 25 minutes of our interview and the next 20 minutes after that, questions from you.
Speak up!
Sorry, hold it closer, sorry. Is that better? Thank you. The next 25 minutes of my questions and then 20 minutes after that of yours, we'll get to some of the complexity of Iain Duncan Smith, the man who is really committed to social justice, but who had many people in the country thinking that he was a kind of monster who was trying to make life difficult for the poor. And somebody who is undoubtedly concerned about the future prosperity of the nation, and yet there's a leading Brexiteer. And as we saw from Philip Hammond's speech today, certainly in the short term, the Chancellor thinks that this is leading us down a rather perilous economic road. So I'm going to start off by saying that when I was a journalist and I saw Iain Duncan Smith as leader of the Conservative Party, it was clear that this wasn't a role in which was making the most of his talents. And when I saw him again on stage at the Conservative conference, when he was speaking for the first time in his capacity as an anti-poverty campaigner, I saw a man absolutely transformed and somebody who was completely driven by a sense of purpose running through him, not self-conscious about what he was saying, but simply consumed with wanting to get an important message across. So I want to start off by asking you, why is it that you suddenly got converted to this cause?
Well, I didn't actually, because I wrote about this right back when I was quite literally recently elected. And then again I wrote about, there was a particular problem about social breakdown when I was Shadow Secretary for Social Security. The problem when you become leader of a party is that in opposition, is that you discover that first of all, in opposition, everyone has agendas and everyone believes that their agenda would deliver you into government. So if you just lost power, as William found and I found, the party is more intent on arguing with itself than anything else. So you go through this really difficult period. And the problem with being a leader, again, is you have no power, really, to get them to do anything, because you're not in government, you have no patronage. You can't promise them knighthoods because you can't deliver them. You know, you can promise peerages away, but they have to wait for a long time to come, and you know, who knows if they ever get them. So all of this is kind of jammed tomorrow, and it's very difficult And it was quite difficult for us when, coming into power, you were up against Tony Blair, who was in his heyday at that point, and the media thought he could do no wrong, and it was very difficult to even get a hearing. And then, of course, the Iraq War stuff began, Afghanistan and Iraq War. And when there's a crisis or war, it's even more difficult for an opposition leader to even so much as get coverage, because no one really wants to hear from the opposition. They want to hear from the Prime Minister, because you've got aircraft going in to bomb things and soldiers going out there. And the leader of the opposition is kind of a tokenistic position to be in. So that's very difficult to get your idea. But actually, as leader of the opposition, I did say, believe it or not, we want to talk less about the things that we enjoy talking about and more about the things that people every day actually think are issues that they should deal with. And I said, therefore, Europe is a big issue for us, but, you know, we should give ourselves a self-denying ordinance and go and look at the health service and welfare. And so I did do that, and that's how it started. So the visit to Gallowgate and Easthouse started when I was leader of the opposition, because I was trying to get the party onto these areas where I said these are the kind of issues that people worry about and talk about, and jobs, etc. So we had some effect on that, but then later on when I left, I set up the CSJ because I wanted to continue that trend, and that therefore released from having to be nice to my own party. I was able, therefore, just to tell them what I thought. It was one wonderful moment, actually. Sorry, I shouldn't be digressing like this because you asked me a single specific question.
I think everyone here is happy with your digressions. That's what they've come to hear.
Okay, well, there was one moment when I was asked, I don't know why, but after Michael Howard became leader, and I'd set up the CSJ, and we were kind of on the periphery at that point, quite a lot, actually. But after that, but during that time, I was asked to attend a conference of Conservative leaders of council. And I remember going into a room, and they were having breakout sessions, and I was allocated one of the breakout sessions. Phyllis will remember this. So I travelled to some place, I can't remember where it was, sat in an empty room for a while we waited for their main meeting to end, and in came a bunch of Conservative leaders, you know, and it was entitled Social Justice in the Conservative Party. And I did my dog and pony show over what we should do, and I sat there, and then one by one, they all said, why do we have to use the words social justice? You know, can't we talk about social reform? Can't we have, welfare reform? They came with lots of terms, and I said, because the public understands social justice, whether you agree with them or not, it tells them something about themselves, so it's time we camped out on their territory, not try and make them come to ours. Went on and on and on. I had one last moment when some chap who's kept on niggling away about this, and I said, I tell you what I'm going to do. I said, we're not going to leave the room until you get up and tell me I believe in social justice. And there was complete silence, and he said, well, why can't I say social reform? I said, no, you have to say social justice. So we had this for about 4 minutes going back and forth, and everyone was absolutely deadly silent. I said, go on then, just say it. Just say it. Doesn't matter if you never say it again, just say it. And he said, all right, I believe in social justice. A massive round of applause. It was like a revivalist meeting. I said, done. Thank you, that's the first step.
What distinctive message did you think you were getting across by making people talk about justice rather than reform?
It was really the idea of making it human. So in other words, we tend to see things in terms of what Westminster talks about, but actually, even though a kind of Hayekian view of this is that social and justice cannot go together because social is collective, justice is individual, therefore the two cannot exist together because they misdefine each other. I understand that, but I said, that's the trouble really. But for the public, it's a term that they like to describe themselves with, and that they think is about helping people who help others. And we did some polling on this, and it wasn't, from their mind, it wasn't actually defined by Labour or by the left anyway of anybody. It was just about their warm sense about what is being decent. So I thought, well, if they understand that, why do you want to reinvent something? Just get the Conservative Party across that term, which had been nigh on impossible. But now, of course, quite interestingly, Conservatives go on and on about it the whole time.
What did you hope to achieve, first of all, when you set up the CSJ, and then when you became Secretary of State?
Well, we set up the CSJ was to advance the argument that actually changing people's lives and helping bring improvement in their lives shouldn't just be left to the left, in the sense that the idea of owning poverty and the way to resolve poverty had for years been just kind of dumped and left, well, you know, that's something which the left deal with and we deal with the other stuff. And I just felt that, you know, in politics, if you abandon an area and don't argue and debate it, then thinking on it becomes incredibly flabby and lazy. No one challenges that, and the result of that is that in all probability, policy is easily made and even easier to fail. And it occurred to me that as we looked around and went to these communities, there is something fundamentally wrong about the way in which we think about poverty. And we then worked on these 5 pathways that said if we looked at poverty as much about the way that their lives are, then so the question really is, why is somebody unable to have the income that will help them be above poverty, as it were, and be able to negotiate their lives, rather than just how much income do they have, and therefore how can we alleviate that? And so the idea was, if you can get people's lives to change and restructure so that they can themselves deliver what is necessary to take them above poverty, that's as critical an issue as how much money they have, which is a defining point as to whether they're in poverty or not, but not necessarily the defining point about why they're there and what has happened.
So you want to deal with multiple causes and give people pathways out of poverty and motivation. Did it work?
Well, I think it has worked so far, but as you know, it's a long and slow process, because I think the levels of social breakdown in various communities have been very high, and I think that this is not something that can be achieved in a matter of a few years. There are, of course, real issues. One of the problems of trying to tackle this at a time when you're going into run a government when the economy has pretty much crashed, and when, you know, the banks are in trouble, when people are really wondering whether or not there'll be, you know, high levels of unemployment for years, and incomes are difficult, tax revenues are bad, debt and deficits, etc. That is always compromises slightly what you have to do, and sometimes more than slightly. But the basic structures of what I wanted to do, I set out to put in place, which would help change that, and things like the work programme that we brought in, which is to actually help bring real effort and outside, more personalised attention to get long-term unemployed back close to the labour market and into the labour market, making the idea that work is the best way out of poverty for those that can work was critical. Making work pay is a critical issue, and I know there's a debate about people being in work but actually still therefore not having enough income. But this is like a stage-by-stage process, because, of course, universal credit was designed deliberately so that as you brought them into work, you were able to get underneath them and help make sure that that process was a progression. Now, there are some issues around my disputes with the Chancellor about this, ex-Chancellor, but the reality is universal credit structure is absolutely, as it rolls out, the key to this change, and this will take over a period of time. You will begin to see that how transformative that is. So in the short term, we've made progress, but in the longer term, my view is that we will really begin to get to the structures that actually help change and alleviate that state of life that they're in.
Now, we all know that when you resigned, you said that you'd had enough of the welfare cuts that were being imposed by the Chancellor and of your budget being salami sliced. And we know that the incentives for people who are unemployed to go back to work were savagely cut over 3-4 years in which the Chancellor was looking for savings. Did those in the end, do you think, end up undermining the whole idea of the making it worthwhile to work?
Well, the answer must be yes to that, because that's why I resigned. And my view was that, of course, you know, we had a problem which we had to resolve, which is we have to get the deficit down, we have to, at the end of the day, be an economy that can pay its way, and that is a critical economic issue that needs to be settled. However, it did also strike me that we couldn't just do this more and more just off a narrow group of people. Yes, there were issues about welfare spending, but my view has always been that in the medium to long term, what we were putting in place, as I come back to the issues and the reforms, and there were a large number of them, including the pensions reforms, were all about trying to build that process of change that builds in self-sufficiency, and that in itself, in due course, drives out the demand and need for higher welfare payments. So you can make short-term savings, but what has to go on at the same time is you have to build in the structures. And I come back to the universal credit point. The reason why I bang on about that so much is I believe, properly balanced, that will be absolutely transformative to people's lives for lots of reasons that aren't even to do with money. You know, the idea, for example, that when someone falls unemployed under the present system, they go off into the job centre where they, quite rightly, get, you know, focused on work, harried about it, get back into work. Once they go to work, they leave the job centre, they leave the advisor, and now they're into a Byzantine tax credit system that they don't understand. They never know how much they should have. It penalises them if they change their hours because they don't know whether they should inform anybody. These are people who are least likely to be able to understand all of that, but we expect them to be able to understand more complexity than we, who are probably in work full-time and doing all this, would ever manage for ourselves. So the idea is, instead of just doing that, universal credit keeps them in the job centre. If they do short-term hours, they still come back, they have an advisor to talk to. So this now establishes a human relationship where there was just a bunch of technicalities and things, and that human relationship then is used to advise them and help them and nurture them through, push them a bit, yes, actually advise them, yes, but at the same time take a real interest in moving them on and helping them through their problems, you know, childcare issues, let's help you sort that one out. Suddenly, that will transform things, and in all the areas where they're doing it now, almost immediately you see a change in the relationship between the advisor. They're not just now pushing them, they're now seen as, oh, I'll give them a call, get a problem solved. So that will be transformed, as well as the monies as you cross over into work and as the taper. So the withdrawal rates now become reasonable, that every hour of work becomes rational. And I was talking to B&Q, interestingly, what has never been calculated is the dynamic effect on business. B&Q said to me that in the areas where universal credit is rolled out, they're now changing their whole pattern of investment and training. Why? Because they don't have to break up the jobs into 16-hour jobs. They can now do 16 hours, 4 more hours, you can do those, would you like to take them? Yes. Now we can start investing in training them because now they become a valuable commodity to us. Completely changes the way they work. So my point about this structure of transformation is really what I came in to do, and which I was determined to deliver. Of course you have to, you know, find ways to make savings and excesses. Yes, quite right. But there are lots of other things. There, for example, is the whole issue of the sickness, disability, and social care kind of mess that we've got at the moment, where you have a series of different budgets, all doing slightly different things to the same people, without any consideration of what could be done if we put everything together and looked at people in terms of their need rather than a demand-based process. And that's really what we were trying to bring forward for the last couple of years. Philippa, again, will know this, but we didn't... Is it mine, is it? Okay. That we did... Oh, wow. So that was also the other thing. So that was on the stocks, had been for a while, and we were trying to make progress with that, and I think there's some real scope for that as a major reform which could change and transform the lives of those who really do genuinely need that kind of support and help, and make the money go much further and better.
Why didn't George Osborne grasp this essential point?
Well, I'm sure he did.
Well, why didn't he act on it?
Well, you know, we had a series of discussions about how this would work, and
which ended up with you walking out.
Well,
more than discussions.
We didn't actually, funnily enough, have a discussion about that, but yeah. Well, all I can say is that I felt that there was a real argument for rethinking that last year and a half. You know, my sense was that. Let me give you an example. I have argued for some time that I'm all for raising pensions, and we've did a lot of reform. The single-tier pension I'm really proud of. I work with Steve very closely to deliver that. You know, getting rid of the default retirement age, you know, getting automatic enrolment going. These are very, very big changes. But there was one area where I kept saying, look, when we came in 2010, we had been committed to relinking with earnings. Absolutely is what we should do. Then we had this policy which came out of the coalition of the triple lock. Now, great to give it a quick kick, but the figure now is that right now, today, the cost of the triple lock over earnings is an extra £18 billion right now. And my point was, you were asking for more savings from another area, when actually, when we look at this, there is a balancing act that needs to take place here, intergenerational fairness. and a sense that you can still be good and reasonable and improve these, but the rate of increase doesn't necessarily have to be where it is right now, and that is our problem. So these are big questions and debates about where we make our decisions, in fairness about how we do this, so that everybody bears a load through the generations.
But I come back to this point, and maybe you're saving it for your memoirs, but why is it that Osborne didn't share your point of view on this? It was pretty critical.
I can't answer that question really, because I think, you know...
You must have had an argument when you argued with him.
I don't know. Did we, Philip? Did we have arguments with him? I can't remember now. We had a few. Well, it was always a debate. The key question was, on balance, you know, is this the right thing to do? And what is your target audience? And my view was, there's a moment when, you know, the greater good rather than the greater electoral good bears a balance, I think.
The implication of what you're saying is that he thought his target audience were not the people who were struggling and the people who were poor, so he didn't really care.
No, I don't. I wouldn't accuse him of not caring. I don't think that's right. I think the difference was the balance of where he felt the priorities lay. And for him, the priority lay in reducing quite rightly, I can understand this, reducing the deficit. Of course, we had to do that. And also the belief that he wanted to exempt the, you know, pensioners and the pension from that process. And my argument was we needed to broaden this out, and we couldn't just narrow this down. Yes, there were changes and reductions need to be made within the welfare budget, but there was a point where we needed to broaden out because the structural reforms were vital, and we needed to see them come in at the right level. And the universal credit issue was a very big issue for me at the time of the last spending review.
You've made clear that you think that the incentive structure needed to be stronger and you didn't want the cuts that were made. Not enough money was going into welfare. Now you've got a Prime Minister who's come in and said that social justice is one of her key objectives. Should she now be putting more money into the incentives behind universal credit and reversing some of the cuts which Osborne insisted on?
Well, I've been pretty... sorry about that. I've been pretty public about my view about this, and I think that I absolutely agree with her, and I support her in what she says. She says she wants to get to the bottom 5 deciles of the income earners in society, and I fundamentally agree with that. Whilst I'm obviously very focused on the bottom 2 to 3 deciles, I think there is a case to be made for progression. And so the bottom 5 deciles are very, very important. In fact, you know, in the Brexit debate, you could see categorically that this group was particularly concerned and upset about the nature of the fact that salaries hadn't risen, that they'd in some cases been driven down. I mean, the overhang from 2008 for that group, you know, forgetting any of the welfare change and anything else, the reality is that this had not been foreseen, that it would take so long for incomes to start to rise, and even rise for this group. And there are lots of factors in that, and I'll come back to that. So I completely agree with Theresa, and she's right to focus on this. But I make one single point. And this is the bit that we've argued about endlessly. Universal credit is designed deliberately to be able to help all of that group. And if I tell you that when universal credit is rolled out in the next couple of years, 70 to 80% of the bottom 5 deciles will be on universal credit. If you want to help people in that group, the most efficient way to do it is to put your money into universal credit, and you will lift their life chances almost immediately. It's a great idea to raise the thresholds of tax, generally, to get people out of tax. But actually, for the money you spend, it's nowhere near as effective as actually going to that direct intervention level of universal credit, which is designed to be efficiently able to get to that target audience. So every pound you spend is a pound of effective life chance change.
What kind of increase would you want to see in that budget then?
Well, it's not me to dictate.
No, but you can advise.
Okay, from an advisory standpoint, as a dispassionate observer, my sense is that I would like to go back to the original position that we were in before we decided to take the work allowances out, and particularly as tax credits.
Which is keeping, say, 60 pence in every pound. Was it 65 pence?
No, that's the taper.
Okay.
The taper hasn't changed. Sorry, this is the work allowances, you're right. So what happens is this was the money
Just tell us in a simple sentence.
Okay. The universal credit in financial terms is divided into 2 bits. There's the work allowances and the taper. The taper is the withdrawal rate. Tax credits, terrible, up, down, flat, terrible withdrawal rates, etc. Sometimes, 95 pence in the pound. Universal credit has a persistent single taper that runs at 65 pence in the pound is what you have taken away. You keep the rest, which may seem like not a lot, but it's a lot compared to tax credits. The other bit of it is, as you enter into work, which is really a critical bit, there's called the work allowance bit. It's the same in tax credits, but not as efficiently done. So each group, whether they have a sickness or a disability, or whether they're lone parents, or whether they're a couple or whatever, they all have an allowance of earnings before you taper away. So that gives you your opportunity to target money directly at those most in need of support and help.
Do you want those thresholds?
Those were reduced because of the pressure we were under.
Just give us an example, one figure. If I was a mother and I had 2 children and I went to work, what would my...
I'd have to scratch around at the top of my head for the figures, but...
Are we talking about a couple of thousand a year? Is that the difference?
Yeah, well, the difference was they were quite significantly reduced, and they will make a big difference because it means your money starts tapering away at a far earlier level. Now, when the tax credits were reduced into that, it was difficult, but they kind of meshed. When that all went wrong and the tax credits were put back in, you now hit a cliff and you go down onto universal credit, and that can't be right. So my point is, if you want universal really to work and to be really effective, I would argue, and it's not news because I've said this all along, this is the place I'd go back to revisit that, because I think, in essence, on balance, if you want to change lives, that was designed to do just that, and I would put my money there.
Well, you've said that if she wants to help the struggling, it mustn't be tokenistic. So this is, in essence, what you're talking about.
I am arguing for that as a direct position, and I know I've discussed this anyway with everybody, and they're all fed up with me talking about it, but I simply say, if you have £1 to spend and you want to change lives at the bottom end of the income scale, if you put it in universal credit, it goes right to those people who are doing the right thing, who you're trying to get into work. And I think that is what we as Conservatives are about, is making work pay. Universal credit does that, and I'm proud as hell that we're rolling that out.
Now, the fascinating thing about this to me is that you're clearly so committed to this as an ideal, and yet every outside observer who looks at the economic effects of Brexit, which you're equally powerfully committed to, thinks that it is certainly for the next few years going to be very damaging. And it's clear from the Chancellor's speech this morning, which he talks about not sticking to the targets on austerity, is that he thinks he has to relax policy precisely because Britain is going to be somewhat poorer. So how do you equate these two things? What is Brexit going to do particularly for the people that you're so concerned about, the struggling and the poor?
Well, first of all, I'm not altogether sure, Jenni, that I completely agree with you about the Chancellor's interpretation of this. I think that what he's done is he's giving himself elbow room to decide one way or the other, because I don't think anyone can predict anything over this, because we are into new territory. The reality is we are about to change the destination of the UK in terms of its economy and its relationships. So these are big decisions that are being made. So his statement today that we don't want to be absolutely now fixed to the idea somehow we can just go to a surplus, I think that's right, by the way. But also inside his speech today, he made it clear that it is wholly possible, as far as he's concerned, that any of the pessimism could be confounded, and that actually as the UK goes out, if we get this right, could actually, as the head of the publishing organisation in Germany said the other day, that the UK in 5 years, he believes, will actually be the destination for people who want to invest, and will see business really zing. So, there is a balance on this, and there's a group of different views. Why do I think it? Well, first of all, I generally do think that the departure from the European Union now will benefit us, because I think it gives us the flexibility in terms of the way that our economy is set. I think there are two things about the European. The first is that I can understand someone that really believes in the European Union and believes in the ideal behind it, which is to create this process of locking together countries economically and in terms of all sorts of aspects of their policy, even in defence policy. I can understand the logic of that. If that's what you believe, then that is quite wholly logical to me. I personally don't think it's the right reading about how you resolve conflict between nations. I think fundamentally democracy, the rule of law and the right to own property are the critical three components to making peaceful nations. And therefore cooperation beyond that is really the key. But if you believe in the idea that the problems of the past were all created by nation states, then I can understand your logic, Spinelli's view. I can see why they're there. I don't criticise them for it, I just don't agree with it. But I think the problem is when you place politics in front of that's when you start to get the economics completely out of kilter. And the problem with the European Union is that they are right in that place right now, which is they have made a political ideal and a half-thought-through economic process. And it's really hurting. It's really hurting the European Union. Now, why do I think the UK will do better outside? It's intriguingly that the UK has always been slightly semi-detached from the nature of the way that things are done in Europe generally. For example, we have always done more trade with the rest of the world than we do within the European Union. In fact, ironically, we did probably proportionately more trade before we joined the European Union with the European Union as it is today than we did afterwards. But the point is that we have always been an outward-looking nation as much as we've been involved with Europe. So for us, it's really just a resettlement and a statement about where I think we naturally find it much easier to be, which is involved with Europe, friends, cooperating, trading, but not being locked to this idea of this ever closer union process. And to do that became clear and obvious that we probably had to leave. How will that benefit? Well, it gives us some control over some things that we don't have at the moment. And for people on low incomes, I do think the issue of migration has been a fundamental disaster for us, but for the European Union as well. The problem you've got is that, and the figures are now coming out quite interestingly, that actually at low income level, at what I call low skilled work level, the biggest problem has been that migration across the board and long term from the European Union, 80% of it has been about low skilled work. And this has meant that two things have happened. The first is it's very difficult for people in that area of work to compete if you've got, family, housing, all the normal costs. If you've got someone coming in who can afford to come in and take this low income level, particularly short-term migration, which has been really difficult. People come in for under a year, very low housing costs, they claim their benefits, their tax credits and everything else, and their family benefits, that boosts it up, they take short hours work. And then there's a little bit of a scam that's been going on here, which is quite a lot of companies then do this, then some then offer cash in hand on the back of it, they go elsewhere to do cash in hand, it's unregistered. So there's a lot of gaming of the system that takes place. It's very easy, uneasy, very difficult to pick up. That's had a direct effect on the income levels of people at the lowest level. The second part of it is services. There are problems about services, and who do they affect most of all when they have problems in these areas? They are, again, people on the lowest income. So how do you resolve that? You don't resolve it by saying we're never going to let anybody in, but you resolve it by a migration system that deals with access to work, not access to the UK. So a